They were never meant to be found. For dimes, struck decades apart, 1966, 1988, 1995, and 2020, each hiding mistakes the U.S. Mint never admitted, minted in silence, slipped into circulation, then lost in pockets and drawers, until sharp-eyed collectors uncovered their secrets. What looks like spare change could be worth thousands. If you know what to look for, these aren't just errors. They're mysteries, forged in metal, and one of them might still be in your pocket. In 1966, the United States Mint found itself under pressure. The Coinage Act of 1965 had only recently begun to take effect, stripping silver from circulating dimes and quarters in response to rising metal costs. The once silver-rich Roosevelt dime had transformed into a copper-nickel-clad coin, unfamiliar to the touch, lighter in tone, and, perhaps most importantly, cost-effective. These were the dimes that would quietly flood the nation's change jars, vending machines, and cash registers. But somewhere, in the midst of this massive transition, a mistake slipped through. Coins struck in 1966 bore no mint marks, another temporary change intended to dissuade hoarding during the silver transition. Production was centralized, with dimes rolling off presses at Philadelphia and Denver, yet indistinguishable to the eye. Masses of these coins moved into circulation unnoticed, blending into the background of everyday commerce. But nestled among them was one that refused to remain anonymous. It was decades later, at a modest estate sale in the suburbs of Ohio, that the dime first caught a seasoned collector's eye. The man wasn't expecting anything extraordinary that afternoon, just a few old nickels, wheat cents, and the occasional silver Roosevelt. As he sifted through a plastic tub of coins, the wear and tear of circulation played tricks on the eye. But one particular 1966 dime struck him differently. He turned it under the light. The reeded edge looked normal, the obverse bore the familiar Roosevelt profile. But something about the reverse felt off. There was a sharpness to the lettering, but not where it should have been. The torch, olive branch, and oak were distorted, as if smeared across the planchet in defiance of the intended strike. Closer examination revealed doubling. Not the ordinary kind born of hub wear or mechanical shifts. This was crisp, pronounced. The motto, United States of America, danced with echoes just beside each letter, and one dime wore shadows that shouldn't exist on a single strike that he didn't rush. He was used to false alarms. He took it home, pulled out his loupe and magnifier. The doubling on the reverse was striking, but what startled him more was the obverse. Roosevelt's profile exhibited subtle, almost imperceptible shifts along the nose, eye, and jawline. He weighed it. Standard. He checked the diameter. Consistent. But the minting anomaly whispered a deeper story. Could this be a genuine double die reverse? He cross-referenced his error coin catalogs, checked online forums, and even contacted a few trusted dealers. Most had never heard of a confirmed double die for the 1966 dime. The few who did dismissed it as misattribution or minor machine doubling. But this dime didn't fit those explanations. It was as though the die itself had twisted, ever so slightly, between strikes that he submitted it to a grading service, carefully packing it in the protective flip and filling out the submission form with practiced precision. Weeks passed. Then came the confirmation, 1966 10C double die reverse, FS 801. Verified. Authenticated. Graded. In 1988, the U.S. Mint was humming with efficiency. At a time when the Reagan era was giving way to new transitions in leadership and technology, coin production in Philadelphia and Denver pressed onward with mechanical precision. The Roosevelt dime, minted since 1946 in honor of Franklin D. Roosevelt, had long become a staple of American currency. The clad composition, outer layers of copper-nickel bonded to a pure copper core, had replaced silver decades earlier, and production techniques had evolved, streamlined, and hardened against most forms of human or mechanical error. Most, but not all, that year, more than 1.3 billion dimes were struck across U.S. mints. They passed through sorting, bagging, and distribution at breakneck speed. Yet somewhere, in a small batch, or perhaps just a handful, something was off. Not enough to be noticed by machines. Not enough to trigger alarms. Just enough to change everything for those who knew how to look. It wasn't until years later that the quiet anomaly made itself known. On a cloudy afternoon in Fresno, California, a coin collector named Harold Kessler was sorting through a bulk purchase of circulated change. He'd picked up 50 pounds of coins from a retired vending machine operator, mostly mundane stuff. Nickels worn to smoothness, quarters with chewing gum still clinging to their ridges. Dimes, too, thousands of them, clinking into trays, their silver sheen dulled by decades of pocket wear. Harold had been at it for hours when his fingers paused. It was a 1988 Roosevelt dime, but the profile, it looked almost haunted. The usual strong features of Roosevelt's left-facing bust had softened in an unnatural way. The hairline lacked detail, the rim bled unevenly into the fields, and the coin's surface bore an oddly convex shape, not worn, not struck off center, but subtly bubbled. He flipped it. The torch, the olive branch, the oak, none of it was crisp. In fact, the reverse seemed misaligned, but not rotated. Something deeper. A ghostly doubling near the word one and a strange weakness in United States of America. Almost as if the coin had been struck through layers of something not quite right. To the average eye, it was flawed. To Harold, it was potential. He spent nights comparing it under magnification to other 1988 specimens. He consulted references, asked questions in coin forums, emailed known experts, most of whom dismissed it initially as a case of simple die fatigue or a common plating issue. But Harold sensed more. The weight was slightly off. The color beneath the worn surface appeared duller, grayer, and lacked the traditional nickel shine. He suspected something that would send shockwaves through numismatics if confirmed. Could it have been struck on a foreign planchet? Weeks passed. He mailed the coin, reluctantly, to a grading service. Months later, it returned with a label that left him stunned: 1988 Roosevelt dime, struck on a Philippine 10-centimo planchet. Weight, 2.0 grams. Composition, brass. Mint error. Just a handful ever known. News trickled out slowly. On forums first, then in coin club newsletters. Some collectors debated its legitimacy, claiming planchet errors of this kind were almost impossible in 1988 due to stricter controls. Others pointed to records of Philippine coin production contracts fulfilled by U.S. mints in earlier decades, suggesting leftover blanks might have remained hidden in bins or beneath conveyors. Theories multiplied, but what remained indisputable was this: the coin was real, the error was genuine, and its origins were murky enough to fascinate the community. Offers began arriving, first in the hundreds, then crossing the $1,000 mark. A 10-cent coin that had likely been spent dozens of times, dropped on counters, fed into payphones, now coveted beyond its face value. But Harold didn't sell. Not yet. He watched as error coins began trending upward. A 1982 Roosevelt dime missing the clad layer fetched $3,500 at auction. A double-denomination dime-cent hybrid went for nearly $10,000. Error collectors were no longer seen as niche hobbyists, they were specialists hunting modern-day treasures. Harold's dime, with its foreign heart and domestic face, stood at the crossroad of two worlds. The market became curious, then obsessed. Was this dime unique? Were there more? Other collectors dug into old rolls, combed junk silver boxes at flea markets, revisited 1988 dimes they'd tossed aside. One more surfaced in Arizona, another possibly in Florida, though poorly preserved. Each new discovery reignited the mystery. Why 1988? Why the Philippines? And why had no one noticed sooner? Then, another twist. A retired mint employee, after seeing a news article about Harold's dime, came forward anonymously. He recalled an incident during late 1987 or early 1988 when a crate of rejected foreign planchets, meant for destruction, was mistakenly moved into domestic production storage at the Denver Mint. The crate was later unaccounted for, never investigated. No one thought it could have made its way into the feed lines. But now, with the emergence of multiple brass-based 1988 dimes, the pieces began to fit. Somewhere in that high-speed, high-pressure environment, mistakes had been made. Forgotten. And now unearthed. What made Harold's dime so special wasn't just the error, it was the story it told. Not just of a coin, but of how a machine's slip, a man's intuition, and history's silence could combine into a discovery decades later. This dime had become a timeline compressed into metal, minted amid geopolitical shifts, lost in circulation, and reborn as a relic of chance. The value climbed further. An error auction in Chicago listed a similar brass dime with an opening bid of $5,000. It sold for $7,800. Experts predicted that Harold's original find, still in better condition, still with the full weight of narrative and provenance, could easily double that, but Harold never listed it. He carried it in a velvet pouch, showing it at conventions, lectures, and numismatic fairs. He wasn't interested in parting with it. Not because of greed, but because he believed coins like this didn't just belong to collectors. They belonged to curiosity. To wonder. To those willing to see beyond the obvious, and so, the 1988 dime became a legend whispered between enthusiasts. One of those rare instances when the smallest denomination sparked the biggest questions. How many more lay out there? How many went unnoticed, used in meters, change machines, forgotten wallets? Perhaps someone will find another tomorrow. Or maybe not for decades. But it only takes one wrong blank, one misstep in a mint thousands of miles away, and one persistent eye to bring such a secret into the light. By 1995, the United States Mint had reached an era of peak production and precision. The Cold War was over, the economy was stabilizing, and the U.S. currency system, in its modern-clad composition, had become an afterthought to most Americans. The Roosevelt dime, struck continuously since 1946, was so commonplace it seemed invisible, slipping through hands, machines, and registers without a second glance. That year alone, nearly 2 billion dimes were minted across the Philadelphia and Denver facilities, all bearing the now familiar copper-nickel sandwich composition, all meant to be indistinguishable from one another, yet even the most well-oiled machinery is subject to moments of failure. And somewhere, in that overwhelming tide of mass production, a few coins emerged that were simply not right. Years later, a collector named Celeste Romano sat at her kitchen table in Tulsa, Oklahoma, working through what she thought was a routine sort. She had bought 5 boxes of bank-wrapped dimes from a local branch, hoping to fill some missing dates in her Roosevelt collection. She wasn't expecting anything exciting, just the steady rhythm of repetition, the meditative click of coins being examined and dropped into their designated spots, but one coin didn't click. It didn't fit. It was lighter in color, almost washed out. The face of Roosevelt, though clearly struck, lacked definition. His eye seemed soft, his hair matted where it should have been cleanly separated. Celeste squinted. She turned the coin over. The torch on the reverse looked stretched. The vertical lines flared slightly to the left, as if melted, while the words United States of America displayed faint doubling. Not the classic machine doubling, the telltale shelf-like blur, but something more organic, more alive. She set the dime aside and moved on, thinking maybe it had been struck through grease. But her mind kept drifting back. Later that night, under a 10x loupe and with a proper LED lamp, she examined it again. And then she saw it, the rim on the obverse bled unevenly into the field. The edges weren't just weak, they were incomplete. She pulled out her digital scale. Standard Roosevelt dimes weigh 2.27 grams. This one came in at 1.8. A full half-gram short. That was no ordinary weak strike. Something far more unusual was happening here. Celeste posted images online, first in error coin forums, then in private Facebook groups. The responses ranged from curious to dismissive. Some suggested post-mint damage, others chalked it up to a worn die or even cleaning. But a few experienced collectors raised their eyebrows. One asked if she had ever seen a dime struck on a foreign planchet. The idea seemed absurd at first. In 1995, the U.S. Mint wasn't minting coins for other countries. Those contracts had mostly ended by the late 80s. But Celeste dug deeper and learned of lingering blanks, old planchets left over from previous international minting agreements, occasionally slipping into circulation years later, embedded among billions of U.S. blanks. One such planchet, used for a Costa Rican 5 centimos coin, shared nearly the same diameter as a Roosevelt dime but was made of aluminum bronze and weighed less. She stared at her dime under better lighting. The yellowish tinge hiding beneath the grime suddenly made sense. This wasn't struck on standard U.S. material. Celeste sent the coin to NGC for authentication. Weeks passed. The wait was maddening. She checked her tracking number daily, rereading old forum threads, rewatching videos about similar foreign planchet errors. Finally, the package returned with a label that changed everything: 1995 Roosevelt dime, struck on a Costa Rican planchet. Aluminum bronze. Weight, 1.8 g. Mint error. AU55. There were no known others, the whispers began. Articles followed. Coin Week published a short feature. YouTubers speculated. A dime that had likely cost someone a soda in 1995 was now sitting in a protective holder, already drawing offers. The first came from a collector in New Jersey, $1, $200 cash. Then a dealer from Miami offered $2,000 and a trade for a 1942/1 mercury dime. Celeste declined. The coin wasn't for sale. Not yet. She wanted to understand it better. Why 1995? Why that planchet? The Mint denied knowledge of any leftover Costa Rican blanks from the 80s still being in stock in the mid-90s. But internal documents from the Denver facility hinted at planchet shortages and emergency substitutions during production spikes, especially during the spring run, when circulation demands peaked. A FOIA request revealed that in early 1995, an anomaly had been flagged on the weight calibration sensors at one of the Denver presses. No follow-up was noted. Just a single technician scribbled entry: weight variance. Possibly contaminated hopper. That hopper may have held more than standard copper-nickel blanks. The price offers rose as the story spread. By late 2021, Heritage Auctions reached out to Celeste, encouraging her to consign. They had sold a 1999 P Georgia quarter struck on a foreign planchet for $7,500. They believed her dime might beat that, but something else was brewing. In late 2022, another 1995 dime surfaced, this time from a collector in Minneapolis. It weighed 1.78 grams. Bronze-toned, obverse slightly off-center, similar ghosting in the devices. Sent to PCGS. Confirmed, same error, same planchet type. Now there were two. Suddenly, Celeste's dime wasn't just a fluke. It was the first in a thread of connected anomalies, and then came the twist that turned speculation into disbelief. A third coin appeared in the hands of a private grader. It too was a 1995 dime, clearly struck on a foreign planchet, but not aluminum bronze. This one, reddish in hue and weighing only 1.4 grams, matched the planchet type of a Dominican 25 centavos coin. But how? A theory emerged. During the 1994 to 1995 production transition, surplus planchets from outdated foreign contracts, still stored at the Mint, were accidentally loaded into feed lines, their origins unknown to modern staff. These blanks were struck with U.S. designs and entered circulation unnoticed. Over time, their presence became legend, denied officially but whispered in coin clubs across the country. What made Celeste's coin extraordinary wasn't just that it was the first found. It was the sharpest, the cleanest, the specimen that had survived with the greatest detail. It had become the reference point. The coin against which others would be measured. Collectors dubbed it the Costa dime. Its value became impossible to pin down. Was it worth $10,000, $20,000? More? No one could say. It was no longer just about scarcity. It was about mystery. About being part of something larger, something that challenged assumptions about modern minting security. Something that reminded the numismatic world that even in the era of high-speed precision and industrial oversight, mistakes could still slip through, quiet, small, and waiting to be found decades later. Celeste kept the dime. Not in a safe. Not in a vault. But in her home, next to a small display of other oddities, an off-center Lincoln cent, a clipped planchet Jefferson nickel, a double-denomination quarter struck on a cent blank. But none of them ever matched the strange pull of that single 1995 Roosevelt dime, minted in an age of certainty and routine, yet carrying within it the chaos of a long-forgotten decision, a misfiled shipment, and a collector's careful eye. The year 2020 was anything but ordinary. As the world grappled with a global pandemic, economic uncertainty surged, and millions of Americans found themselves stockpiling everyday essentials, including coins. For the first time in decades, the United States experienced a widespread coin shortage. Businesses posted signs requesting exact change. The U.S. Mint, operating under pandemic restrictions, scaled down staffing and shifted its priorities. In the midst of that disruption, with mints pushing out coinage at unprecedented speeds under immense pressure, the Roosevelt dime, small, efficient, and usually uneventful, became the accidental stage for something extraordinary. 2020 dimes were struck in Philadelphia and Denver, continuing the same design introduced in 1946. With no design changes, and no fanfare attached to the date, the coins were expected to pass through circulation unnoticed, just like they had for decades. Nearly 2.8 billion dimes were minted that year. And amid the deluge, no one anticipated that something as subtle as a few misaligned dies or an overlooked blank could upend numismatic expectations. Miles from the nearest coin shop, in a rural pocket of northern Michigan, a quiet collector named Arlen Vickers was sorting through customer change from his family's hardware store. Quarantine had slowed business to a crawl, but that didn't stop Arlen from clinking through rolls of coins at the end of each day, a ritual more than a pursuit. He wasn't looking for riches. Just the satisfaction of spotting something others had missed. A double die, maybe. A clipped planchet. Anything to break the monotony. That evening, as sunlight faded through his office window, he opened a freshly delivered bank roll of dimes marked Fed 2020-D. The coins inside gleamed with a fresh, uncirculated shine, nothing rare at first glance. But about halfway through the roll, one dime caught on the edge of the paper sleeve. When Arlen plucked it free, he noticed it was slightly thicker than the rest. Just enough to feel wrong in the fingers that he held it to the light. The obverse was almost ghost-like. Roosevelt's face was there, but barely. The details were faint, as if the coin had been struck through wax or cloth. But it wasn't just worn, it was incomplete in a deliberate, almost eerie way. The devices near the rim, including the "In God We Trust" motto, looked partially obliterated. The date, however, was clear, 2020. He turned it over. The reverse, too, was missing detail. The torch was present but looked stretched, distorted, as though it had been pulled upward mid-strike. Letters from United States of America bled slightly into the field, some nearly unreadable. The coin had a softness, a blur that didn't match any known variety. Arlen weighed it. It clocked in at 2.65 grams, slightly heavier than normal. The rim looked crushed on one edge, sharp on the other. But most curious of all, there was no visible reading. Smooth as a nickel he placed it under his microscope. There, he noticed something that chilled him. A faint second outline of Roosevelt's profile, shifted just slightly southeast of the main image. It wasn't a mechanical doubling. It wasn't machine damage. It looked like a classic double die, but on both sides of the coin. Arlen knew that shouldn't happen. Not in modern coinage. Not in 2020. He posted a few photos online, hoping for insight. The first replies trickled in slowly. Some dismissed it as a damaged coin, others speculated it had been struck through a capped die. But then someone noticed the smooth edge. And another user, a metallurgist by trade, pointed out the unusual layering at the rim. It appeared to be multiple blanks fused together. Within 24 hours, the threat exploded, theories spiraled. Some suggested a misfeed of blanks during a high-speed striking process, 2 or even 3 planchets compressed and struck simultaneously. Others argued it might be a transitional error or the result of a press malfunction during a skeleton scrap ejection. No one had seen anything quite like it from the Denver Mint. By the end of the week, Arlen had received offers. $500. $800. Then $1,200 from a dealer in Texas. He hesitated. He wanted answers more than money. He submitted the coin to PCGS, insured and packed in layers of foam. It took 6 weeks. When it returned, the label read 2020 D Roosevelt dime, struck on folded clad layer / indented planchet / broadstrike error, MS63 mint error, unique composite strike. The coin had somehow been struck as 2 planchets overlapped and one partially folded, creating an unnatural bulge in the coin center and warping the design on both sides. The lack of reading? A result of the collar failing to fully engage, letting the coin expand during the strike. The weight discrepancy and doubling? An effect of compression and skewed alignment. It wasn't just an error, it was several, stacked and tangled into one. Collectors dubbed it the Phantom Dime. Arlen was bombarded with interview requests. Coin World published an article with high-res photos. The story made it to Reddit's front page. The buzz was deafening. Yet, for every numismatist captivated by the Phantom Dime, there were skeptics. Some argued that the error, while dramatic, might have limited appeal due to its modern date. But others insisted that 2020, already cemented in history for unprecedented global chaos, added mystique. A once-in-a-century mistake, struck during a once-in-a-century year. Arlen kept the coin at first. But the value kept climbing. Heritage Auctions reached out with a reserved listing. PCGS had logged no other similar examples. The coin was now being whispered about in the same breath as the 2000 Sacagawea dollar struck on a Massachusetts state quarter planchet and the famed 1975 NOS Roosevelt dime. In April 2023, the Phantom Dime went up for auction. It opened at $5,000. By the time the gavel fell, the final hammer price was $18,250. The buyer, a private collector from Nevada, had been tracking the error since its discovery. He believed the coin was not just rare, but symbolic. A product of disorder, created by machine error in a year ruled by chaos. A dime that was supposed to be perfect, but bore the scars of the time it was made. And then came one final twist. Just weeks after the auction, a second error surfaced, this one from the Philadelphia Mint. Same year. Similar smooth edge. But instead of a doubled die or a broad strike, it bore an unstruck center and a perfectly formed rim. Experts examined it. The verdict: partial strike due to planchet obstruction, with metal flow resembling the Phantom Dime. But unlike Arlen's, this one lacked visual drama. Collectors began to ask, was there more than one batch? Could this have been part of a wider issue never caught during mint quality checks, when staffing and oversight were thin? Or was the Phantom Dime a complete one-off, born of randomness, never to be repeated? No one knows for sure. What remains is a Roosevelt dime, struck during a moment when everything was fragile. Machines rushed, inspectors stretched thin, and thousands of coins pushed into a strained economy. Out of that storm came one flawed masterpiece, found not in a showcase, but in a paper roll in a quiet Michigan town, and somewhere, in a drawer or change jar, another might still wait.